Greg Stoker is an Afghanistan war veteran who served in the United States Army Rangers, 4 combat deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment. He is now running for Congress in Texas, and he was recently arrested for protesting the war in Iran alongside dozens of other veterans, including elderly women and veterans in wheelchairs. He was also one of the veterans detained on the Gaza flotilla by Israel when he attempted to bring humanitarian aid to Palestinians. His campaign slogan is simple and unambiguous. On behalf of his fellow Texans, he will not accept this anymore. And frankly, that is exactly why I wanted to sit down with him. Greg, thank you for being here. Let us get right into it, because there is a lot to cover. First, I think it is worth establishing something early. You are not a creature of the conventional left-right binary, are you? I am aligned with people across the political spectrum. Personally, I lean left, but not in the liberal sense of that word as it is commonly used today. I organize heavily with conservatives, which makes sense given that I am running in Texas District 31. It is a district that has never once been represented by a Democrat, and I have no problem with that. I do not deal in left-right labels. I focus on issues, working-class issues mostly, and those issues have a way of cutting straight across partisan lines. Because this war is not a war on Iran alone. It is a war on all of us. That is exactly right. So let us start with the anti-war argument at the core of your platformed 4 combat deployments in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Radicalized me, and I use that word deliberately, into the radical position that we should not be doing these interventionist wars. They accomplish nothing. They get enormous numbers of people killed on all sides, and they enrich the tiniest fraction of the population, the defense contracting apparatus, by washing taxpayer money that should be funding social programs and public infrastructure out of the public sector and into private hands. It is, in its essential structure, a money laundering scheme. That is what these wars are. And over the past 20 years, our military has been absolutely degraded because it has become entirely for profit. We are deindustrialized. We have massive munition stockpile problems. We spend the bulk of the defense budget on exquisite, enormously expensive projects that are becoming increasingly irrelevant, the F-35 program being the most obvious example. It went over budget year after year, and it is now a 5th-generation fighter craft that is already struggling to justify its existence. You mentioned Israeli interference in the F-35 program. Can you walk us through what you mean by that? I want to make sure I understand this clearly. This is something that is fairly well known in defense and intelligence circles, though it does not get much coverage in mainstream outlets. There is a long documented history of Israel collecting, modifying, and reverse engineering American military technology. The Jonathan Pollard case is the most famous public example, a spy operating out of Texas on behalf of Israel. But it goes well beyond that. When you go through the Foreign Area Officer Training pipeline, when you get read into a top-secret security clearance, when you receive counterintelligence briefings on who poses the most adversarial collection threat against U.S. personnel and diplomats overseas, the answer is not China. It is not Russia. It is Israel. And I have spoken to people at CIA who will tell you that Israeli intelligence officers are no longer permitted into certain buildings at Langley. They use a third-party off-site facility because the working assessment at the agency is that they simply cannot be trusted. This is documented open-source information. The FBI actively tracks Israeli intelligence agents operating throughout the continental United States. The problem is that our relationship with Israel is so financially and politically entangled that there is not much practical will to do anything about it beyond briefing people on operational security. And in terms of the F-35 specifically, the concern is that Israel has been reverse engineering certain components and producing its own versions, which creates enormous problems for U.S. patent law and for weapons sales contracts with other countries. These contracts are extraordinarily complex about what buyers can and cannot do with U.S. military products, how they can modify them, where components can be sourced. There have already been significant scandals where U.S. supply chain parts ended up in Iran while it was under complete sanctions. The labyrinthine nature of these contracts is itself part of the problem, and Israel has consistently demonstrated that it does not wish to be bound by those constraints. That includes corporate espionage against U.S. defense contractors. This has a long history. They are simultaneously our declared greatest strategic ally and one of our most adversarial intelligence actors. Those two things coexist, and pretending otherwise is simply dishonest. So when the American public is told that we need Israel because they buy our weapons and provide us with irreplaceable intelligence, that is a propaganda frame, not entirely. They do want our weapons. The issue is not that they do not want them. It is that they do not want to be constrained by the conditions under which we provide them, or accountable to how they use them. But the broader point stands. Israel could not sustain its current project without the unconditional military, economic, and diplomatic support of the United States. They have known that for generations, which is why they have constructed such an extensive influence and propaganda operation inside the continental United States. AIPAC is just the most visible part of a much larger architecture. From my analytical perspective, the question of whether Israel controls the United States is too simplistic. It is not so much that the tail is wagging the dog, it is that it is all one dog. Israel functions as America's base in the Middle East, a forward operating position for projecting power and destabilizing the region in ways that serve Western imperial interests. That destabilization, even efforts like the Abraham Accords, is ultimately about redrawing borders and creating vassal states whose resources and populations can be exploited by Western capital. Israel is not the only sub-imperial state serving that function. The UAE and Saudi Arabia play similar roles. But Israel is the most deeply embedded, and this is a bipartisan national security consensus that goes back decades. Biden himself said it as a younger senator, that if Israel did not exist, we would need to invent one to expand our influence in the region. During the Cold War, it was about keeping the Soviets out of West Asia. Now it is about absolute hegemony over one of the most strategically significant pieces of geography on Earth, sitting at the intersection of 3 continents, sitting on top of enormous oil resources. And one of the reasons these wars keep happening, and we keep losing them, is that we keep refusing to learn anything from the previous ones. That is true, but I also want to be careful about oversimplification. Blaming everything on Israel is a seductive analytical shortcut. It is a useful starting point, but it does not hold up as a complete explanation. The United States is currently running a bombing campaign in Ecuador that has nothing to do with Israel. It has been intervening in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Chile, in Nicaragua, in Panama for generations. Would those interventions stop if Israel ceased to exist tomorrow? I do not think so. Would we stop threatening war with China over Taiwan? I doubt it. The imperial drive exists independently of any one relationship. Israel is a significant and in some ways uniquely influential actor within that system, but it did not create the system. Let us talk about Iran specifically, because the historical context here is almost completely absent from mainstream coverage. The American public has no real grasp of this history, and that ignorance is not accidental, it is manufactured. People are told to blame the Iranian Revolution for destabilizing the region, as if a perfectly reasonable and moderate regime was suddenly overturned by religious extremists. The actual history is the opposite. Iran has been attempting to complete a genuine democratic revolution for over 100 years. It came very close in the early 1950s when Mohammad Mossadegh was elected and made the straightforward democratic decision to nationalize Iranian oil, which British Petroleum had long treated as its own private property. That decision precipitated a joint MI6 and CIA operation to overthrow a democratically elected leader and install a puppet dictator, the Shah, in his place. The Shah's regime was brutal. The Savak, his secret police, were systematic torturers. The working class was immiserated. The country's resources were pillaged to serve Western corporate and strategic interests. And the revisionism now being pushed by certain Iranian diaspora voices on CNN and Fox News, that the Shah's era was some kind of golden age of freedom because people could wear bikinis and watch foreign films in Tehran, is simply false. It is propaganda designed to manufacture consent for a new round of intervention. We heard the exact same argument about Afghanistan. We had to save the women. We all know how that ended. The revolution happened because the Shah was so catastrophically bad that conservatives, communists, religious minorities, secular Democrats, and everyone in between put their differences aside and overthrew him together. That popular coalition would never have formed if the United States had simply allowed Iran to function as a democracy in 1953. We created the conditions for the revolution by refusing to allow democracy to exist when it threatened our corporate interests. And now we are shocked that the Iranians do not trust us. What is your assessment of where the current war stands and whether the Trump administration has any coherent strategy? There is no plan. It is completely and visibly floundering. The working theory in Washington appears to be that if you bomb Iran hard enough, the regime will collapse under internal pressure. That is not going to happen. The regime is actually stronger now than it was before the war began. And a crucial reason for that is that the strikes killed a significant portion of the older IRGC leadership, commanders who still held a certain awe of American military supremacy, who remembered a time when the myth of U.S. invincibility carried real psychological weight. They have been replaced by a younger generation of commanders who watched the entire global war on terror unfold in real time. They watched what happened in Iraq. They watched what happened in Afghanistan. They are not intimidated. They have studied us, and they have drawn conclusions about our actual capabilities that are considerably more accurate than our public posture suggests. We have massive readiness problems, power projection problems, morale problems, stockpile problems. A ground invasion of Iran is simply not viable. It is a country vastly larger than Iraq. It is a garrison state with not just the IRGC and the regular military, but also the Basij, a massive network of decentralized militias that would be a counterinsurgency nightmare by any military assessment. The terrain is brutal, and the strategic objectives that were publicly announced at the beginning of this operation have not been achieved and cannot be achieved by the means being employed. Dismantling the Iranian nuclear program is impossible, because even if you destroy every known facility, you cannot destroy the knowledge. The scientists still exist. The expertise still exists. They will rebuild. Destroying the ballistic missile program is impossible because a significant portion of Iran's missile production capacity is underground in locations that American intelligence does not even fully know, let alone have the munitions to reach. And regime change, there is simply nothing in place for it. There is no government in exile drafting a constitution. There is no organized popular vanguard inside Iran positioned to seize the institutions of power if the current government falls. The comparison some people in Washington were apparently making to Venezuela simply does not hold. Iran is not Venezuela. Leaked recordings that Reuters first published show Trump saying explicitly that he did not know what was happening, that he thought the campaign would last 3 or 4 days. That tells you everything you need to know about the depth of strategic planning that preceded this war, and yet you cannot simply back down. That is the trap, and it is a genuine one. From the imperial perspective, backing down now would be devastating to the broader global credibility of American military power projection. If the United States visibly fails in Iran, what does that mean for any future attempt to deter China? What does it mean for every other security relationship and threat the country maintains? The damage would be enormous and durable. So the administration is caught between two equally bad options: concede defeat, which is politically and strategically catastrophic, or keep this thing going indefinitely and hope that some off-ramp materializes. Neither is a good answer. And the people who put the country in this position should be held accountable for it. And we have essentially handed Iran something extraordinary in the process. We have given Iran its own Suez Canal. The Strait of Hormuz was open before this war started. It was open because it was in everyone's interest for it to be open. Now, through a combination of military failure and strategic incoherence, Iran, in conjunction with Oman, which controls adjacent territory, is asserting permanent control over the strait and charging tolls. We have transformed a shared international waterway into an Iranian revenue stream. The fact that anyone in this administration is attempting to spin this as anything resembling a success is a testament either to their cynicism or to their genuine detachment from reality. Let me ask you about something broader, the rotating villain problem. The idea that we vote out the warmongers and vote in the peace candidates, and somehow the wars just keep happening regardless of who is in power. The idea that a handful of congressional representatives out of 400 plus are going to get into office and fundamentally transform this system is, I will say it plainly, naive. Reform politics is how we got here. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed for the people it was designed to serve. What we are watching is not a malfunction. It is the machine working as intended. And the rotating villain dynamic is real, and it is structural. Bush launched the global war on terror. Obama expanded it, not just overseas but domestically. He talked about repealing the Patriot Act and instead expanded ICE and made immigration detention 90% for profit. Trump expanded it further. Biden facilitated the genocide in Gaza when he had the power to stop it. And now Trump is expanding these conflicts again. At this point, if you are still organizing your political understanding around the Democrat versus Republican frame, if you genuinely believe that switching parties produces meaningfully different outcomes on war, on the surveillance state, on the military-industrial complex, then I think you are missing what is actually happening. It is theater. The only thing they reliably compete on is culture war. Because culture war is how you keep the population divided and distracted, while the actual machinery of empire continues operating without interruption. You were on the Gaza flotilla. Tell us what happened. I was approached to organize a veterans delegation attached to the Global Freedom Flotilla. I agreed because my message as a combat veteran has always been consistent. Whatever forms of violence and repression we deploy overseas always come back home. There is a social theory, the imperial boomerang, that makes this point, and it is so easily demonstrated that it barely qualifies as theory anymore. The most striking example in the defense sector is what contractors call the Palestine Laboratory. The occupied West Bank and Gaza function as live testing environments for surveillance technology, AI systems, facial recognition software, autonomous weapons platforms, systems like Smart Shooter, which is a biometric targeting system that can engage individuals based on facial recognition without requiring a human trigger. All of this is field-tested on Palestinian civilians under occupation and then sold to and deployed by police departments across the United States. Palantir is currently using data from Gaza to model how populations move and mass migrate during disaster events, and they are developing that capability for domestic use. The COP cities being constructed in cities across America are based on IDF counterinsurgency training centers modeled on operations in Gaza. There is no separation between the war state abroad and the police state at home. They are the same project. The flotilla was intercepted about 20 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza. It took the Israeli Navy most of the night because we had approximately 40 ships and their navy is small. We were eventually taken to an immigration facility at Ashdod Port, where Itamar Ben-Gvir showed up with a camera crew to film propaganda about detaining terrorists, which is a remarkable claim coming from a man who has himself been charged with abetting terrorism by his own government. We were held for approximately 5 days. They threw out people's medications, including those of diabetic detainees who came dangerously close to a medical crisis. We had to go on hunger strike to get people access to a medic. The women were separated from the men and had a considerably worse experience: sleep deprivation through nightly raids, dogs, constant harassment. They could not treat us with the level of coercive force they wanted to, and they were visibly uncomfortable with that constraint. Eventually, they released us and sent us home. The State Department, for what it is worth, was the last of 44 consulates to show up. That detail tells you everything you need to know about whose interests this government believes it is in office to serve. One final question. Where can people find you and support your campaign? My podcast is Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that your problematic uncle will hate. I have been too busy with the campaign to record as many episodes as I would like, but it is there. On social media, I am at Greg Doje Stoker across all platforms, where I do short-form content. And if you want to support the campaign, you can find everything at stokerfortexas.com. This has been a genuinely important conversation. Thank you for your time, for your honesty, and for the work you are doing. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and we will see you in the next one.